my screen now? All right.
Yes.
Great. So I just want to give like a super brief overview of what's going to happen in this session before introducing a little bit of the Polička Collective and also where this session comes from and what we're hoping to do. So I'm going to do that. After that, we're going to have a couple of brief pitches. And we have 4, so to say, guests today. So people who are actually not part of the Polička Collective, but we're really eager to hear from them. The first one will be Bart talking about the Polish cooperative tradition. We're then gonna hear from Josef on food co-ops and tenant unions in Prague, Czechia. We're gonna hear from Ono about food self-provisioning networks in Hungary. From Emma about these diverse futures in 21st century Slovakia. And we're gonna close with 2 people who have been already involved in the Polička Collective. Anya, who will talk about lifestyle migrants in rural peripheries in Czechia, and Lilian will share some experiences on building bridges with the Gardeners' Day in Estonia. So our ambition is to keep the pitches short and to hold off with the questions for later on. And we're also hoping to have a sort of a more general discussion looking a little bit beyond these cases. And I will also already share the questions that kind of guided us in starting this session. So we're curious about these unlikely alliances and about spaces where community economy initiatives, which are maybe more deliberate and more recent, meet with more traditional practices, which might be less outspoken in their politics and transformative ambitions. And we would like to discuss with everyone who's present about where do you see these existing or also potential alliances already? Which synergies does this generate, but also maybe which challenges? And are there some ways in which these alliances could be supported or otherwise acted upon from a research, but also kind of more than research type of interventions? So I'm just gonna leave these questions here now to, you can also keep them in the back of your minds as we go into the pitches. And I would just like to tell a little bit about the Polička Collective, who is behind this session. And it's actually, well, it's a very informal group of researchers and friends by now who are all using the approaches of diverse and community economies in their research and other activities in Central and Eastern Europe and former Soviet Union. And the start of it is actually also in a Ljubljana session 4 years ago in a cross-geographical conversation on post-communism, social democracy, anarchism, and diverse economies, which was joined by Nadia, who is also here, by Pete, who is running a bit late, but should also join us soon. And that was also the session where me and Otavia got to meet, and we were kind of exchanging insights from our then fresh PhD work. And out of that eventually came a paper on diverse economies and post-socialism. And basically the questions we explored in this writing, we're looking at what the diverse economies approach can bring to research in post-socialist spaces as a specific context, and also vice versa, what can this region and this context contribute to the diverse economies theory? And those are still the questions we have, I think. And we got to present this paper at the RSA Central and Eastern Europe conference in 2022. And you can see on this picture many people who are also in this virtual room, including Pete, who is just joining in right in time. And it was Marcus who actually initiated this get-together in Leipzig, where we hosted some special sessions on community economies in Central and Eastern Europe. And that's where we really realized that we had a lot to talk about and a lot of insights to exchange and generate. And in order to do that, we organized a writing retreat in a Czech town named Polička. So that's where the name comes from. This was it. You can also see everybody who was there and the discussions that we had in Polička and later on also in several other places eventually led to another collective paper, which is now still under review, but I hope that the co-authors don't mind that I already say that the title is on babushkas and postcapitalism, and our ambition there is to really speak to diverse economies theory from the global East, so from the post-socialist, post-Soviet space. And I mean, we're not all hardcore diverse economies scholars, but instead we're concerned with this political project of post-capitalism. So we're also thinking about these questions in relation to degrowth or social solidarity economy and other sort of frames. So this is a paper, a sort of an essay that came out of a workshop organized at the D Group conference in Zagreb, where Eva and Josef and other people also joined us. And that's what really also strengthened this realization that there are many more people engaging with similar questions, and that really kind of triggered this need to exchange more. So that's what brings us to today. And I think with that, I'm gonna stop sharing for a little bit and hand over to Bart, who's gonna speak without slides. And then later on, I will share again and show the slides that other people have brought.
Okay, thank you, Lucy. To be sure that I will respect this very strict limits of time, I decided that I will read my presentation. It is, I think, not more than 5-6 minutes. I'm both a historian of ideology of cooperativism in Poland and in Central and Eastern Europe, and an activist of largest food cooperative in Poland, Dobrze, which means good. In my speech, both of these functions will be important because I would like to focus on the connection between the history of the Polish cooperative movement and the transformation of the new cooperativism, using Marcelo Vieta's term, undergoing in Poland. When describing contemporary food cooperatives, it should be noted that they were established over 15 years ago without any direct connection with the heritage of the cooperative movement from the turn of the 20th century in Poland. I would like to argue that today a return to this heritage is necessary or even essential because the situation of Polish cooperative resembles that of the historical peasant and worker consumer cooperatives almost 120 years ago, when the legendary local union of cooperatives, SPOEM, together, was being formed. Polish cooperatives of the 2000s were created similarly to what happened globally, inspired by the alter globalization movement and modern ecology, and in opposition to the old cooperative movement, or even completely without any relation to it. Historical grassroots and autonomous cooperatives as people's institutions of the common were created in conditions of state oppression, first by partitioning empires and later by the independent Republic of Poland, which after 1926 took the path of authoritarianism. After 1945, cooperatives were subordinated to the Polish People's Republic and removed from the political scene as a project of social modernization competing with state communism. The Polish People's Republic expanded it to the size of a state food monopoly, simultaneously depriving it of political autonomy. After the fall of communism, during the transition to a capitalist economy, we witnessed a breakdown of organizational forms and the cooperative ethos. The reasons included the rapid adaptation of the neoliberal model in the economy, something, a la Chile, and anti-communist agitation condemning the ancien regime in almost every dimension. At the time, cooperatives began to be seen as relicts of the previous system, as on the one hand, economically inefficient in the conditions of the free market, and on the other hand, etatist and often corrupt. Today, for young new cooperativists, the old cooperative movement embodied the worst features of both communism and capitalism. In this way, historical cooperatives in Poland became an abundant common good, balancing between public property and private enterprise. In recent years, however, we have observed a slow increasing of interest in the history of the movement and drawing from its experiences. After about 15 years of development, the Polish movement of new cooperatives is stagnating and relatively weak. A few years ago, there were about 60 cooperatives in Poland. Now it is not more than 45 organizations. Many of them have only a few members and have significant problems with engaging the activists. The actions of some activists and scholars, including myself, have drawn attention to the question: what transformed the weak cooperative movement in Tsarist Russia or Austria-Hungarian Galicia into an organization bringing together hundreds of cooperatives and thousands of members? It was then that a group of activists from moderately leftist circles established an umbrella organization, an information center with its own journal and a joint storehouse, leading to a tenfold increase in the number of cooperatives, which together created the Społem Union, which later became a synonym for cooperativism in Poland. Today, we want to do the same. I will spend the entire upcoming weekend in Kraków at the workshops aimed at signing the statute of the new organization, the network of food cooperatives in Poland, whose basic goals will be building a common identity for the whole movement, ensuring support for cooperatives in the legal or economic sense, creating IT support also and knowledge circulation system, advocacy, education, lobbying to creating better conditions for cooperatives. The experiences of this cooperative movement from the beginning of the 20th century, in the completely different conditions of post-industrial or cognitive capitalism, became a model for building the contemporary Społem. In this way, above the period of communism and neoliberal transformation, with all the good and bad features. There is built a bridge which we hope will connect the historical beginnings with the present day of the community economy in Poland. Okay, that's all. Thank you. I hope that it was not more than 5 minutes.
Thank you. You were super precise on time.
Thank you.
Thanks for kicking us off. Maybe I will just invite people to note their questions in the chat if there are questions, as we're gonna get to them later on. And I will try and figure out my PowerPoint again as I give the word to Joseph.
Okay, thank you. I will speak for both me and my colleague Teresa Virtová from the Czech Academy of Sciences about an experiment basically that we have organized in trying to connect two different, we could say, organizing strategies or initiatives and trying to create a synergy between them. I will start with the first slide, which goes a bit into the theoretical framing, or I could say something like the understanding that was also important for us in devising the experiment, which also includes picking up some threads from the discussions that we had together in Zagreb last year, where we're trying to understand community economy initiatives or various kinds of solidarity economies as fitting broader patterns of social reproductions. We're also informed by the world systems analytical perspective, the work of Agnes Gať in the CEE context, for example. And so the understanding behind the experiment is that one strategy that we could try is connecting political economic strategies which are basically confrontational, such as various forms of collective bargaining, and constructive in terms of trying to create food co-ops, basically. The next slide shows this in a graphical way as described by Sachs in this article from 2019, where the idea is basically that you combine the strategy of disrupting the surplus value production for capital with creating institutions which he conceptualizes as commons, which are able to reproduce life in a non-capitalist way. And so our pilot project, next slide, please, has connected these two initiatives, the organic food co-op Obživa in Prague, which I think in many respects is quite similar to Dobře. It has been established already in 2017, and it's basically a food co-op that connects organic food producers to up to now mostly middle-class families interested in healthy, organic, ethical food consumption. And the other initiative, it's called the Iniciativa nájemníků a nájemnic, the Tenants Initiative, which is basically a tenants union. It's younger. It only exists for 2 years now, but already in 5 cities. It has about 300 members, and what it does mostly is defending tenants against landlords. And so Teresa is a member of Obživa. I'm a member of Iniciativa nájemníků. That's also how we're connected to this personally, not only as scholars, but also as activists. And the pilot project that we did which is described on the next slide. Yes, thank you. we organized together with the Reset Research and Organizing Center, which we're associated with, where the Tenants Initiative has entered Obživa as a collective member, kind of, where the membership fee is lower than if you entered, if one would become member as an individual. And also the shopping in the food co-op, which has two physical places in Prague, physical shops, has become a kind of regular community event for the associated tenants. One of the results is that it can it's helping grow the member base of both organizations. So for the food co-op, it's kind of a way to get beyond this ethical middle-class consumption model, we could say, because this growth model of expanding the co-op has been kind of exhausted already. For the tenants union, it's it's a benefit for the members, and it's another, we could say, alternative social reproduction strategy, or a social, or defending their social reproduction against exploitation by the landlords, basically, but also in this way circumventing the large corporate food chains, and also getting better quality food for better prices. So right now the pilot project is in a initial phase. It's going to be evaluated after 6 months, sometime in January, I think. But the preliminary evaluation is that it is mutually beneficial. And what we're thinking about now is the various questions of sustainability, replicability. We already have some interest in expanding it towards other, also workplace-based unions, and how could we work further with this, or even expand it into other areas of social reproduction, not just food, but for example housing or energy. So yeah, that's it basically for the discussion.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks also for sticking to the time, and yeah, I look forward to discussing more after the pitches. I'm gonna give the word to Onno next, and I'm gonna stop sharing again for that.
Hello, everybody. I'm Onno. I was a student in the rural sociology department in Wageningen at where Lucy's working, and they spoon-fed me the diverse economy framework and most of your reading. So I decided, and at the same time, my wife is Hungarian, I'm Dutch. My wife pulled me to the Hungarian countryside, so I was like, okay, then I might as well also do rural sociology, my research in the Hungarian countryside. So I did, and I had a lot of fun, to be honest. You built a lot on your work, but also I used some on that thing on the mushroom at the end of the world, because I tried to paint what I did. I just engaged with everything that was homegrown food and homemade food self-provisioning networks. And while I was engaging with people doing that, I would try to paint a picture of all the humans and non-humans involved in these food self-provisioning projects. And it's painted kind of like a large interconnected, just in one village, interconnected network, and all these relationships were present, and I tried to find values in those relationships and how those values can be possible foundations for imagining better food futures, especially also in Eastern Europe. And yeah, it was really fun, and I'm still engaging with all these networks because I live here, so it was for me a very nice introduction into it. I've found a lot of values of mainly responsibility, reciprocity between animals and or also just forestry areas and houses, and people participating also mainly in this. I try to paint a picture of people are participating in a larger scale network and not per se acting as separate from animals or where the food comes from. And I think that's very valuable looking forward. What was another really deep conclusion, because coming here, also being a Dutch person, quite Western, in of course my perspective, I think it was really important for me. What was essential for understanding a place like this, or getting to understanding it, is that you let go of this idea that it's either or. So either peasant style or modern, or either capitalist or non-capitalist. Or there was really, I noticed that everything is so complex and mixed in it, and people are just in local, just they're related, they have relationship with things and each other, but it's not per se that their actions or their thoughts or what they're doing is per se classified as either bad or good, or part of the future or part of the past. It was really just mix of things constantly, and I think that was a valuable lesson for myself, at least what I pulled out of what I did. But if you have more questions, I had see a lot of overlap with Anja's work, also interested in everyday work here. It was really nice to read your piece. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for sharing, Anna. I also posted a link to your thesis into the chat because I really enjoyed reading it. And I'm curious to hear about your current adventures in Hungary. But before we do, I'm gonna pass the word to Emma. Let's see.
So thank you everyone for the interesting pitches. We'll definitely be looking into some of the ideas you just heard. And yeah, I think I'll just like to briefly introduce my starting research. So I'm just beginning my PhD. And so yeah, it explores what does it mean to live well in 21st century Slovakia with regard to its socialist past. And it's a very, very different present. And what it especially focuses on is on grassroots initiatives and tries to build on what is already out there, what is happening, and capture the potential to reimagine demand, livelihoods, and governance into those that value well-being of humans, but also more than humans. I think since I'm only starting out in my literature review, I'm kind of seeing the alliances through kind of three main bits, which are kind of looking at the past. So like what is already out there, what kind of happened throughout the 20th century, how did the livelihoods kind of changed in the way throughout time, and what was the kind of transition between the change of systems, and how do they kind of keep evolving after the fall of the regime, looking mostly into ecological livelihoods, the notion of care and commons, but also more than human alliances. And then the kind of third part is looking at what is happening. So it would be kind of the new endeavors that are maybe more natural or more common for Western European countries, such as cultural centers or eco-villages or community gardens, and kind of seeing their interactions, and how can this be kind of connected to policy making, and more into seeing their potential in what they really bring, because they bring a big change in terms of social, how we see ourselves in terms of more than human connection, and the ways we really build our imagination of the economy, and how it can work, and what is possible. So in a way, would love to build on the quiet sustainability practices. So the practices that are kind of out there, but they are not necessarily taken as full-on sustainability, or are not done with the direct notion of like, I want this to be sustainable, and to see if they can be brought together with more of the newer endeavors that are, I think, sometimes maybe more kind of neglected by the older generations, being like, oh well, these people don't really work, they don't contribute towards the economy, or they just like have fun in their art centers. Like, what are they doing? So like, how can we really bridge this kind of like communication barrier of like we probably share, or they probably share the same values, but it's not necessarily spoken out. And this is what I would really like to see through my research, to kind of go and talk to people and see if we can find that common ground of and see that we are really beings in common. And the places I'm kind of looking or planning to look at are, as I said, some cultural centers, as this Nova Cvernovka in Bratislava. Maybe some of you heard of it before, and then an eco-village in central Slovakia, and so as a degrowth-inspired business, which was to me very surprising at the beginning, because I thought degrowth is not necessarily very explored topic or movement in Slovakia. Also, the translation to Slovak is very problematic, or not very clear. But this specific company even has a degrowth newsletter where they kind of share how degrowth helps to guide their business and how it helps to like anchor them in like values to be proper ethical business, and is kind of central to their decision making, which is, I think, very interesting and something we could that could definitely be built on. So yeah, I think that's all. Hope I did stick to the time limit.
Thank you, Emma. I hope I didn't mess up your slides too much.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you all so much. Next on, I'm gonna pass to, as I said, to people who have been already involved with the Polička Collective, to also kind of show a little bit the type of work that we have done and how that resonates. And I'm first gonna give the word to Anya.
Again. So I was just thinking I give you a short start, like as a starting point, a short kind of sharing of my kind of unease with the dichotomous thinking regarding alternative food economies and public discourse and governance. So I think many of you already also share in their fields this experience of kind of a division between new alternatives and traditional alternatives. In the sense that these new alternatives are framed as hopeful practices, laboratories for social innovation, prefigurations of sustainable futures. So there is a lot of notions of collective transformative agencies interlinked with them. And in the Central Eastern European context, this is often also involving kind of an adaptation of Western concept into like this local contexts. And on the other hand, there are these traditional alternatives, namely, or most importantly, household food production. So including the sharing and informal sale of products, which is quite widespread in Central Eastern Europe, but it is less celebrated and less connected with debates on sustainability and innovation, which is a real shame. And my claim is that this blindness to actually this diversity and messiness that exists on the ground limits the ability to identify potential allies. And this is what I'm trying to do, like with my work. And what I feel that, or I experience in Czechia, is that paradoxically, an increased interest in new economic alternatives does not seem necessarily lead to overcoming this kind of binary thinking. This is kind of the starting point for my researches. And it's actually quite difficult to discuss household food production under the term alternative food networks, even though I think this is like kind of the core thing, this practice. But it's just like so already used, this term, alternative food networks, for these like engaged and new practices, that it doesn't really work. You're not part of the same debates. And so I wonder, and this is maybe something we could discuss, if it's worth to push for expanding the term, like alternative food networks, to make it more inclusive, more broad, or if it's like useful to use terms such as silent sustainability or silent food sovereignty, which is like maybe more already an existing debate, but it again kind of this like builds on this, yeah, this binarities or these dichotomies. So I would really be interested to learn your thoughts. And in my practical work, I also deal with the second dichotomy of a rural and urban, yeah, where we find much more attention currently being focused on urban sites of alternative economies and diverse economies. So could you go on to the next slide, please? Yeah. So I wonder, actually, based on these observations, if alliances between new and traditional economic alternatives are more likely in rural areas. It's, I mean, a bit of a provocative question, but this is this claim of not only staying within this urban like sites or fields, but really look into what's going on in the countryside. So how do such potential already existing alliances look in the countryside, in rural areas, and what do we learn from them to make the social ecological transformation more inclusive, which is, I think, an aim we could all basically identify with. My research project, it's my PhD project, deals with hopeful practices in times of uncertainty. So I explore diverse alternative agri-food economies in rural Czechia. I've done a lot of ethnographic work where my focus was on informal food production and, most importantly, the subjective notions of agency which are present among less privileged social milieux. So it's kind of the rural working class, if you want to name it. So these practices are from the perspective of the practitioners, often framed as being unpolitical. So they don't identify with like a food movement or anything. And they consider the practices mainly, this like food production mainly, as means to navigate precarity, to experience autonomy. It's a lot about self-care and caring for others, and the feeling of being recognized and connected to others. And what I find interesting in my field was that I was able to study also interrelations with urban to rural lifestyle migrants. So what actually happens when people from an urban creative milieu, usually people who have studied, who are part of the food movement or align with the aims of a food movement, actually move to such like rural peripheries. So the people I met there were self-identifying as conscious consumers and as rural change makers. And you must not imagine their initiatives as being of a large scale. It's rather like a lot about experimentation, gaining also the space to learn something about gardening, to build up networks and engage and so on. And there were a lot of attempts to build of kind of new alternatives and to also work together with your local municipality and to identify what they called like unused potential of this place to bring forward like alternatives. And so now what happened? So just very shortly, my lessons I draw from looking at what actually happens on the ground when people who are already engaged in this like traditional or established food self-provisioning practices meet with these lifestyle migrants and their very politicalized kind of interpretation of food alternatives. So on the one hand, I found very pragmatic corporations, very hands-on and spontaneous forms of, helping each other out, of lending equipment. Some people also pooled resources like products, which they later sold on farmers markets. And the lifestyle migrants also became like new local clients of the products which were produced. And they worked as occasional farmhands, but nothing like big and nothing organized. Yeah? This is really important. What I think was really a big potential for those alliances was that I think I discovered a really sense of a shared food values and shared practices. So there was in both groups this appreciation of homemade food. And there was kind of strong identification with everyday enactments of food sovereignty. So this was as shared, and also this kind of interest in building up experimental knowledge and drawing from informal approaches. And I also think that while there was a lot of skepticism amongst those groups, mutual skepticism, the food production actually was a field where mutual recognition was actually taking place. So just like, I heard things that like local people who went to the gardens of the lifestyle migrants said, like really acknowledged how much work they put into it, and they were building up something that is really beautiful and working and nourishing and so on. And also the lifestyle migrants got quite inspired when they saw what's actually going on which scale local food was produced. For example, there was one guy who said, when there are more gardens and products, he means of the group of lifestyle migrants, we will also hold such harvesting events, which also, of course, is a little bit of a romanticization of actually those like food production as something very collective, which didn't really hold true. But what I also found is that when I say that there's a sense of shared food values, this was just one layer. But if you look deeper into it, there were also a lot of social distinctions and mutual irritations actually concerning those food practices and food values. So it was a lot of debates about animal husbandry. Also, the lifestyle migrants were really irritated how somebody could grow homegrown food, but then, like, you know, for health reasons, for example, but then again go to the supermarket and decide for the most cheapest like kind of version of some other food stuff. And meat eating as such was also like a big issue. And when these issues were voiced by the lifestyle migrants, these like traditional informal farmers actually experienced them as a very strong devaluation of their practices. The lifestyle migrants were also kind of frustrated that the informal farmers wanted to stay informal. There was a big refusal to go formal, to upscale their activities, and to make most of how they would call it, of their undiscovered or unused potential. So there was a lot of like resistance to this responsibilization. Also, they said that the existence of household food production was actually a potential obstacle to introducing new alternatives. Nobody needs new alternatives when they can actually already, use the food they grow themselves or their share in their networks. And I also found that these performances of moral superiority of the lifestyle migrants, their food production was supposed to be, or was considered in their eyes to be more like moral, more ethic, more of a future, of a productive future, then this kind of reinforced a construction, actually, which I have already mentioned in the beginning, of this unreflexive and non-engaged types of food production and these innovative and political practices. And the last thing I would like to mention is that I also think that we should look more at the dynamics which are at play, because the corporations in this practical context actually became less and less during the time, like I spent there several years in the field, actually became less and less with more lifestyle migrants arriving. So kind of the community closed, and it was sufficient to stay within your own networks when you're more people. Yeah, that's what I wanted to share, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Anja. And I see that there's some comments already popping up in the chat. Thanks for that. Before we open the discussion, I will give the floor to Lilian. Oh, this is a promo for Anja's paper, Freezer Full of Meat. Lilian, floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. I'm very happy and grateful to be the last one to tell you more about Sputnik, that has become a bit infamous already within the Polička Collective. So maybe just 2 sentences right up front. The reason or the background of the whole building bridges event with the garden estate, that's how we named it, with the gardeners and the Dutch Garden Cooperative together. The whole reason why it started was that during my PhD project, we had a task also to organize knowledge transfer events with the audience and the people in the target group we had conducted interviews with. And within the years of conducting the interviews on the ground in Eastern Estonia, which I will come to in a second, we also realized that we don't want to do a very typical knowledge transfer event, but we also want to, we have a normative standing, and we have a research objective to kind of reevaluate and engage more food activists, scholars interested in the topic, also artists around this practice, and bring them together, and not, so to say, bring the people around the table, but bring the people around the dacha garden to connect them all around the, you know, what was said nicely, everybody eats, you know, everybody grows food here. So this is the background, and we made it in the last 2 summers, and this year, 2024, they actually organized it with us. We considered also food self-provision in Eastern Estonia in the dachas as an overlooked food practice in the whole Estonia, which tries to be very neoliberal and also kind of values the Western type of community gardens in Tallinn way higher because they contribute to the Korean capital image. Next slide, please. And this is us 3. We're having different backgrounds, and we met a couple of years ago when engaging for this topic around Sillamäe, which is in Eastern Estonia, old post-Soviet city. And we did these events via participatory action research because we engaged from the very beginning the gardening cooperative, the city council, and different gardeners themselves as well into designing the events, into considering what could be the content, how we monitor it, what kind of surveys, interviews, guided tours will happen in the place. So my colleagues and friends, we have also become friends, have a background in social work and in ethnology, which really enabled to have a different in-depth access to the gardeners' lives, because especially Annela has worked there and they have both lived in Sillamäe for quite a bit time and really, you know, had access to people's biographies and had a different trust level than myself, who I was working in Jena in Germany and only spent my August months there. Next slide. So this is Sillamäe, that's Eastern Estonia. And maybe here just quickly, it used to be a closed town. The most of the ethnical Russian minority was resettled to Estonia in the 70s and 80s. And on the right side at the sea, you see the city itself and the town, and the dacha cooperative, which is the biggest dacha cooperative in Estonia, is the one which is circled with the red line. So basically what we argue here, what makes it very significant is really indeed the fact that the size of the dacha cooperative has, the area is basically the same size as the city itself. So it really is not like a niche practice of some community gardening projects in Tallinn, which we don't want to devalue and compare, but it really is an alternative food system on a very different scale. This is what we argue. And everybody, as seen also by the quote, everybody who lives in the city has somehow access or is connected to a dacha garden, which makes it a very, very beautiful object also to connect to all people with, because everybody can share stories from that. And next slide. This is the first garden stay that we organized in 22, which was a very tough year to organize such an event because that was the year where Russia attacked Ukraine. And coming from Estonia, organizing this kind of event in Estonia, NATO having increased army presence at the Eastern Estonia, and us, you know, engaging the Russian dacha gardeners on this topic made it very hard. So this actually enforced us to be super creative and involve a lot of art exhibitions and photography exhibitions, and really circle the whole knowledge transfer event, as it was still called unofficially then, around the pictures of the food and pictures of the gardens to kind of avoid the danger or the risk that we will start talking about the war, and then of course discover as well our differences. But we really had the aim to actually try to build bridges in the times where polarization had taken completely different levels in Estonia. So that was the first event. We had one event in the library with the photography exhibition, vernissage, and the common discussion with the dacha gardeners and different scholar activists on the dacha gardening and food system. And the second one on the ground at Sputnik with food fair, music, dance performances, and guided dacha tours. Next slide. And this was then happening 1 year later in 23, which was even bigger and also involved international artist art summer school with 15 students from all around the world being on the ground of Sputnik and creating different artwork, architectural artwork and photographies, and baking cookies and designing little wooden constructions, all inspired by the Sputnik Dacha gardens and architecture. It was way bigger. It was funded by the British Council in Estonia at this time, and it also involved local politicians this time. So it really also showed us that the Gardens Day made the Sputnik and its importance more visible also within the local municipal government. And I'm gonna maybe now the next slide, that's the last one. There are the pictures. These are the pictures of the music performances and gardeners' market and workshops, the guided tours with the Dacha gardeners. The next slide shows a couple more pictures of the artist students and photography exhibitions and the access to really the most special creative gardens. Maybe the last slide. I know I'm sitting with the time. Maybe this is, we can close here and maybe we can come back at the discussion, which just once again confirmed that this kind of gardening, everybody eats food, many people garden and have access to garden, really is a big enabler and the common denominator in times of polarization and increased within and all it bring together what Anya called new alternatives and the traditional alternatives. On especially what we consider beautiful was to see that the pictures and the artwork was actually a nice gate to actually bring people together, whereas the language that these people were using often actually rather created more differences and distance. Thank you. Sorry for exceeding with the time.
Thank you, Lilian.